Hi, my name is Karyn Denny. I am Navajo I was born and raised in Mount Valley in the Mexican Hat area in Kansas, Arizona, and just there by the Utah border. And Kobahan and Shlinkiani, Bashishkin, Ashin, Edashanella, Kentlachini, Dashache, Ohat Adi, San and Shlink. I just said my clan, and this is my partner, Brandon.
Oh, yeah, Shay, Brandon, William, Francis, and Shay. Not Otana, Touchy, Nishna. Ado, Twitzo, Nibashichin, Kilachini, that's a Nala, Twitchini, that's a Che. Good, Bila Ashla, Ishna. Shit. Alchina Echo Baha. Um, I'm a research lab technician at the New Mexico State University Agricultural Science Center in Farmington, New Mexico. And I'm also the education resource coordinator for a project called the Yago Gardening Project, which teaches third and fourth graders about gardening and healthy eating to help combat food justice issues on the reservation starting at a young level and seeing its effect on their behavior, having healthy eating lessons and garden lessons, as well as the inclusion of a school garden into their curriculum and seeing how it affects their behavior in terms of knowledge of gardening, healthy eating, and choices they make and those related to that. And hopefully we can use this data because as a scientist, we want policy to be data driven and make change based on actual research. So, and another part of my research is the 2015 Gold King mine spill, which 4.5 million gallons of heavy metal laden water came down the Animas River and affected the whole community, all the people living in the San Juan River Valley. So part of my research and work is to monitor the levels of heavy metals in the soil, water, and plant tissue to help consumer, producer, and people's confidence in the area about growing things and returning to gardening. So yeah, and we also farm and garden in the region. So that's just a little of what we do. So
Excellent. I love everything that you guys do, and I love hearing about the different projects you guys work on, and I'm always excited to hear about new things. Cool. So if we want to jump into that first question about your own perspective of how permaculture reflects traditional ways and what permaculture means to you.
Let's see. So for me, I think we learn differently as children and we learn differently as we get older. When I finished grad school, I moved back down here to the Four Corners, and so I could farm with Brandon. And I think I learned a lot about permaculture through him, and just sort of uh, in a way of I guess utilizing seeds that are from our family plots or family heirlooms, and sort of kind of adapting them to different, different land, I guess, different stressing them so that they could be viable during the dry seasons, because out here where we live, we barely get any water, and the weather is harsh, and I really learned a lot about how seeds can survive through different types of weathering. And I just really enjoyed watching his corn, for example, grow on different plots from different family members and friends and people who asked for it. And they've all done really well. They've all been really successful. And I love seeing, seeing that myself, when they come back to us during harvest season, with some of that corn. And also the nice thing about that is, you know, sharing that on social media too, and seeing that on social media like Facebook and stuff. So I'm really happy that I learned, you know, a lot of my knowledge through my partner. And so I guess for me, it's more about seed saving and, you know, passing on that heirloom seeds to different people and different farmers, you know, and sharing that knowledge of that seed.
Yeah, Karyn's been super modest. She's always like that. Her dad was a big person promoting farming. He made all these community gardens back when she was young, and she comes from a farming community out in Halchita, and and I came from a dryland farming community on Black Mesa, Arizona, and we also raised livestock. But growing up, I grew up in the area called the Bennett Freeze area in the joint use area where they were strip mining for coal. So I grew up without running water or electricity. So a lot of I was very lucky. I always tell people this, that I got to grow up in a way that my ancestors did, and very close. And I didn't think I was lucky at the time being a kid, having to ride the bus at 5 o'clock in the morning and come back when it was dark at night. But all this traditional knowledge was instilled in me from a very young age. But then, like Karyn said, we went to school for our various reasons. We're lucky to come back to our communities and share this knowledge. But permaculture is a new concept. Within the last century, people have been saying we have to make a sustainable system that will last, be resilient as well as sustainable. But indigenous people have been practicing agriculture for thousands of years. And the genetics of corn is evident of that, because the genetics of corn goes back 6,000 years. So people have been practicing agriculture in this region in various forms. And Karyn brought up a very good point that of the environment that we live in here in the Four Corners, and it's very, very difficult to actually grow. And we have the benefit of living next to a river, and very blessed. The Navajo people, 70% of them who actually practice agriculture on the Navajo reservation, 70% of them actually live along the San Juan River. And this goes, and the concept of permaculture in our way of thinking, and how I learned about it in school when I was studying sustainable agriculture. And even that was a very new program when I was going to school. Like Karyn said, that our method of permaculture wasn't about creating microenvironments, but it was also like planting trees is something that permaculture stresses. But it does go back to land management, and a lot of that goes back to how we used to farm was what's called swidden farming, which is actually burning an area and then planting it. And because what we didn't know back then on Black Mesa, due to the lack of water, was that we were actually using up a lot of the nutrients, because corn is a heavy nitrogen feeder. And so we had to do a crop rotation. So we had to rotate from corn to potatoes, and then to alfalfa, because we were using up the nutrients, and we had to find a way to actually return the nutrients to the soil. But one of the reasons I went to school was to combine those traditional techniques with modern techniques, because we live in a very, very unique situation here, especially in San Juan County in New Mexico, of the alkaline soil, the amount of precipitation we receive. And So adapting our seeds is one way that they practice agriculture a long time ago. Unknowingly, they knew nothing about epigenetics a long time ago, about how strength is instilled, just like in us, but it's faster in plants and insects. That's why plants and insects, they can adapt to the conditions faster than us because of their breeding cycle. So conditions, if conditions are hard one year, the plants remember that at a genetic level. And so in the next year, if their same conditions persist, they'll be able to survive. But if the right conditions exist, they'll thrive and they'll pop. They'll do better than ever. So stress and success, they walk hand in hand in the traditional form of agriculture. Like, it's all about balance and harmony in this region, and I think that's the perfect definition for permaculture from our perspective, is living in balance and harmony and knowing when you're having a negative effect on your environment.
Yeah, I've only just recently been learning about epigenetics, and it's fascinating. I've been going through the Rocky Mountain Seed Alliance Seed Saving for Farmers class for the past about 8 weeks now. We have 2 weeks left. And last week, the entire class of 2 hours was just on epigenetics, and it was fascinating. I couldn't believe just how much, I mean, I grew up, in a biology major and environmental studies and, learning about genetics and, I didn't realize just how little I knew and how much we're still learning about genetics and epigenetics, even in plants, insects, and even in humans that we didn't realize was taking place. So yeah, it's really cool how quickly plants can adapt to changes in the environment through epigenetics. But I think that's a really good way to look at permaculture and um, that keeping everything in balance. I really like that. Um, would you mind sharing a little bit about how your ancestors have cared for the earth since the beginning and how that has been going on for so long?
When I was in school, I wrote my thesis particularly on the history of the San Juan River Valley. But also, like I mentioned, I grew up close to my relatives and listening to all their stories going back not only into our prehistory, but also into our culture, which is recorded orally. And we like to tell people that we've seen the system, whichever system it was. Sometimes it's environment, sometimes it's a food system that collapses, but we've always adapted and overcame these problems each time they came. So as Navajo people, we like to tell people that right now we're living in the fifth world. So in our world, from our perspective, the world has been destroyed 4 times by various events, and they were always caused by us. Like, there was always preventable. We were always warned about it, but we never ever took those warnings, and we always had to learn to live in a different way. But we also forgot those things. So maintaining that connection with the ancestors and how they lived is very important, but also learning to live in a new environment. Um, um, in particular, studying about the Southwest, there were people that lived here before us, like that they call the ancient Puebloan people, and then the Pueblo people, their ancestors. But all our ancestors, they think that Navajo people are separate from the people that came before them, but we're all intermingled. We all came from the same genetic predecessor, and our stories reflect that, and how change came about. Because in part of my study, I studied the dendrochronological record, which is a very good way to study how the climate was hundreds and hundreds of years ago based on the tree rings. And around the time of the Great Collapse, when the ancient Puebloan people left this region, they they um they went through two major drought periods, a 90-year and a 70-year drought. And right now, I think we're in a 21-year drought. So if these droughts go on for 50 or 70 more years, we'll kind of get a perspective of the conditions they were living in. And they couldn't adapt to that. They weren't able to survive. But that doesn't mean that this region is uninhabitable. But they recognize that the environment that we live in is very fragile, and caring for each system, which would be the food we gather from the wild, we can't overharvest that, and then we can't rely on one system. We have to rely on many systems to adapt, and that's how the Navajo people were able to survive. That they didn't fully practice agriculture the way their predecessors had. So they knew where to gather wild food, and they knew that living in one place overuses your environment. So they practice what's called transhumance, which is traveling from a winter camp to a summer camp, so that they were able to use almost two environments and not overuse it. And the way they planted was also very different. There was such a level of kinship which doesn't exist to this day. There was such a bond with their community. People actually worked together and helped out. They had a common goal of helping each other. And I always tell this story when I give presentations at colleges, or even talking with kindergartners, first graders, and second and third graders. I always tell them this story about how Navajos used to plant a long time ago. They used to have four different types of fields, agricultural fields. And one was a big rectangle field, which was miles long, of corn, beans, watermelon, and squash. And in the historical record, when the Spanish and the French people first came to this region, especially here in the San Juan River Valley, every wash and ditch was full of corn, beans, and squash. So every year, the whole community would get together and they would work these fields. And then when it came time to harvest, everybody would get a piece of it. And so everybody worked together and they had a common goal. And they realized, but they couldn't really rely on, just like today, they couldn't really rely on the rainy season. So then they had to have fallback plans. So back at home, and the partner and the husband and wife, they also had a small circle field and a small square field, which they grew for themselves and for their own small families, just like having a backyard or kitchen garden. So a husband and wife would grow that near their home. And then they would also have a circle field, which was planted out from a spiral out from the center. And whatever they grew in there, they would give to their mother. And that was just to show, to honor her and show her respect of all the stuff that she taught them. And she'll probably be old by this time, so she probably couldn't help out in the big dock SNES or the big field, the community field. You probably couldn't grow as much. So showing respect for their elders and their family members in that way was another way that they also grew. And they also had a triangle field, which they grew their sacred herbs that they would use as offerings and ceremonies and prayer. And that they also knew that that over harvesting, especially wild foods, they always left stuff to flower and come back for the next year. So they always recognize that you take something away, it has to be replaced somehow. But we've kind of lost that sense of kinship and that sense of over harvesting. So I think we kind of need to take lessons from our ancestors and remember those lessons that they taught us, because we also need to survive whatever is coming. For us, it's always around that corner. We're always aware of that as Navajo and Indigenous people.
Thank you. Karyn, did you want to share a little bit about how he talked a little bit about the different shapes of different fields, the square, circle, and triangle, and the spiral ones. And I know that, the different shapes of, gardens or farms and the different ways of planting, like he mentioned, the Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash. And then I know also like waffle gardens. A lot of these, are commonly brought up in permaculture as, different ways to grow or different systems to grow into, encourage, plants that are community planting or companion planting, that kind of stuff. And I was wondering, what of those practices do you see used today, and how are they important to traditional lifeways?
So what we do is dryland farming, and a lot of it is done by most of 80% of the farmers, Navajo farmers or Denny farmers live along the San Juan River. So a lot of it is irrigation or ditch farm. That's how they get their water, and so through the ditch. And so you can't really talk about the good things without talking about the bad. So when we think about our ancestors, we also need to remember where the Long Walk of 1864 and how that had disrupted our traditional lifeways, and then the coming, of the, I want to say, the 19th and the 20th and the 21st century has really disrupted our lifeways again and again and again. And so a lot of this I would call survival. It's not necessarily called farming or permaculture, or it's just a lot of surviving, because a lot of the water that we get is sort of on the end of everything, where so the water is usually contaminated, and it's very difficult to get enough water because we're so far down the river that we look, when we look at the way that we're trying to survive and trying to grow our corn and our beans and our squash, because it is actually one of the ways that we can not only survive through this, but it's proven by not only us, but by our parents and our grandparents and our great grandparents that, the Three Sisters method does work in dry land conditions and harsh conditions. And they are some of the most sturdiest root vegetables and or fruit for the Four Corners region. And when I go back to talk about Howede, we lost a lot of our people during the Long Walk, and the ones that did return, did go back into farming in order to survive, because in our way of thinking about permaculture, the best way to think about it is that, in order for us to maintain our land, which is the most important, we believe that our land will keep us close. We believe that our land will help us to maintain our language. And even as, each generation comes and goes, we believe that as long as we remain within the Four Sacred Mountains, and we continue to practice, the survivance, I think, we'll always be there, I guess. We'll always be here doing and sharing what, been taught by our parents and our grandparents. So,
Yeah, you gotta take care of the young one. Go for it.
Karyn brings up a very good point about how agriculture changed after the Long Walk, and how we planted a long time ago is very different. We never used to plant in rows. We never used to till the soil. And because to us as Navajo people, we believe that we are not supposed to dig in the earth And that's why you see us when we use our planting sticks, we're just poking a hole in the ground. And we never, because it goes back to a lot of stories, and it goes back to our traditions about how we overcame a lot of things in the past. So we made pacts and we made contracts with the earth, with the sky, with the sun, and we and we didn't continue those after the long walk. But a lot of people, I don't see a lot of waffle gardens here in the Four Corners or along the San Juan River due to our access to water. Um, I, I I've seen it done, and it's a very practical way to save water. And I like the way that we've been to a training over in I forget the name of the community, the Pueblo community down in by Santa Fe, and they taught us a lot of those methods. But the method that I see the most is the three sister method, and how companion planting and is very beneficial. And that's the way that we try to show people that um, how to plant, not only because of its uses and how people have um, and it's a proven method, but also it's also economically viable because you're not adding a lot of chemical inputs. If you plant zinnias, or if you plant um, courting, if you plant things that will attract pollinators, but will also detract negative pests, it's very beneficial. And a farmer once told me that the way for people to emulate what you're doing is to make it beautiful. And if you add like zinnias and other beneficial plants, not only do they have a practical use, and that's something that in permaculture they always stress, something must have more than one use for it to be a viable solution to something. So, but um, that's something we try to show people and show them that, oh yeah, you don't have to do things in the way that we were taught. But we're always, because when the new type of agriculture came with plowing and new types of food, it kind of disrupted our diet, and which was very detrimental. But um, it is hard work to do the three sister no-till method, but that goes back to having a connection with our ancestors. And a lot of people want that, especially during the pandemic. There was such a surge in agriculture that we're still trying to meet a return to agriculture, and people realizing now that how weak our food system is. But yeah, three sister method is a very good way. I'll throw in a little tidbit. Uh, the Navajos used to have a four sister method, and they used to plant tobacco alongside with their plants. And if you look in most modern pesticides, there's what they call neonicotinoids, which is a tobacco derivative. So a long time ago, Navajos used to plant tobacco near their, not the tobacco that we see in the store of cigarette, but mountain tobacco. And it was a deterrent for pests. So we see it not only as important to plant in this way and show people that it's important to plant this way, we have to show them how to do it and why it's beneficial, and also why it's economically viable, not only not expensive method, but easy method, and because our ancestors did it, but also its benefits for health and benefits for family and for connection. And um, how it connects, like Karyn, she brought up a very excellent point of how our connection to the earth is very crucial to our culture, our language, and just our way of life. And living in harmony with the earth is something we need to return to, not just indigenous people.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing the little one with us. Always important to be reminded of that. Continuing the knowledge and the tradition and passing it on, both us and your young. So thank you. The last question I had for you was, I mentioned in the the document I sent you about how the three primary ethics or the basis of permaculture is earth care, people care, and fair share, and how that fair share has often been poorly interpreted and poorly enacted upon, and that um, when people thought they were being fair to people in the past, look how history has looked back upon it, and how poorly we have treated a lot of people, especially Native communities throughout the North America and around the world. So I'm curious, what can we do to help promote fair share in a way that supports and empowers the local Native community?
It is kind of hard to talk about, especially when it comes to land, because on the Navajo Nation we have permits and for very different reasons, from site lease or even for agriculture or for conservation reasons and for grazing as well. And so a lot of these permits are passed down from one family member to another. And so it's great when you see siblings farm and share the land with each other, but oftentimes they're in dispute and going to probate to figure out who is going to have access to the land. And so it's very difficult these days trying to farm on the Navajo Nation, not just because of the land dispute issues, but also the lack of access to water. And so, and when we talk about equity, we have to, go back to our own principles of Hajon, and hopefully, design some sort of peace, keeping our peacemaking agreement between families, especially between siblings. And then sort of work on that for our next generation, for our kids and our grandkids. And so hopefully, whatever happens down in the future, I hope that policy will allow us to, because our treaty was done in 1868, so it's a very old treaty. So a lot of reasons why we can't make any new policy is because of what was in that treaty, or the Navajo Nation is not completely sovereign. It's kind of a quasi-sovereign nation, and so it's very difficult to help teach get people to understand the situation on the Navajo Nation because of all of the complexities that come with it. But off the reservation, especially in where we live, in a border town here in Farmington, we've had we were very lucky to know people who farm and know people not only in a farming community, but also in the nonprofit sector and also in the governance sector. And so a lot of it was I guess, groundwork was just sort of partnering, making those relationships and keeping them. And that was very important to me, was making sure that we help other partners and other organizations with their efforts, in hopes that in the future that they would help us. And so that's the way I look at it when it comes to fair share and trying to understand equity, especially along the borders. But on the Navajo Nation, it's just very difficult. I don't see any change coming in my lifetime, hopefully in my kids or my grandkids. So yeah, I mean, I think we've been very lucky, because of the work that we do, provides us, or leads us to people who want the same things as we do. So.
I think, like Karyn said, building connections is very key to a healthy food system. And that was the key to the indigenous food system, was having everybody included in on their access to food. Prior to the type of leadership we had now, the leadership a long time ago in the Navajo perspective was they used to have a peace chief and a war chief, and it had nothing to do with warfare. It had more to do with distribution of labor during the seasons. A peace chief, his role was in the spring and summer and early fall. His job and his role was to get everybody into the fields and coordinate the labor that was going on, and making sure everyone was um, doing their fair share for the season. Because in the role switch to the winter time, the war chief, his job was making sure everybody got enough food in the winter time, and going around and checking on the various homes and households, making sure everyone had enough to eat. So that was the two leadership roles that were that Navajo people gave to their Natanis, or to their leaders, was a peace chief and a war chief, and it was all centered around agriculture. And we don't have that anymore. We don't. Food is not our primary driver anymore, because we can go to the supermarket and get food, and then it's not necessarily healthy. But um, then how we can share nowadays and how it can be equitable is we can share knowledge, and we can share land. There's so much land that's not being used for farming, and it's another group we're involved with is the National Young Farmers Coalition, and they did a survey. I think it was in 2016. I could be wrong, could be earlier, and could be 2012. They did a survey that said that 2/3 of the farmland back then was going to switch hands, either going to go fallow or go into development or go into industrial agriculture. And they found out that most of the farmers um, where the average age of them was 58 years old, and 2/3 of them were 58 years old. The other small fraction of them, 1/3 of them, they were in their 30s. So there's such a disparity in age of how of of people who are actually still farming, and that knowledge is being lost. So connecting with your elders, and because they have that knowledge, not necessarily elders, but older farmers, and connecting it with the younger farmers, and connecting it with the younger generation, and sharing that knowledge before it's lost, and sharing seeds, because we can't do anything unless we promote the health of the seeds, and showing people how to save them properly and store them properly and how to plant them properly is very essential. And also teach them about how to keep your soil healthy, because if your soil is unhealthy and your water is unhealthy, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle. So ensuring that all those key components are healthy is one of the ways we try to help people in the community, and trying to rebuild those bonds of kinship, which is a very important word in our culture, which denotes community, not only kinship, but also relationships, not only between blood relatives, but people who are living in the community, people who have similar goals, because we're only a small part of it. And realizing that and helping each other is key to success in agriculture, and realizing that healthy food can come from your backyard is something we need to stress and teach people, and that knowledge is free, and it's been done for years, and it can be continued for years as long as we recognize how much water we have in our environment, and how much input we have to do. And Native people were experts at that. They were scientists. They knew, like us, we go on a hike. How many plants can we name? But our ancestors, they could name every plant. They could name every animal, and not because that they now because it was a hobby, because they're very life dependent on it, having that knowledge of every type of plant and its uses and what seasonal use. And so returning to that and sharing knowledge is very key to how we can promote permaculture and a healthy food system in this region.
Well, thank you so much, Karyn and Brandon, for joining me. I really appreciate both of your perspectives and willingness to share your views and your personal life histories with that as well. And I really appreciate all the work that you guys do helping the community. And I'm always eager to hear what's next around the corner for you too. Well, so thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I really hope this recording works properly. And as soon it has to like download and convert and stuff. But once it does that, I'll make sure that it recorded properly. And if it didn't, I'll let you know. And hopefully that's not the case. But thank you again so much. And I definitely, as I mentioned in the email, want to thank you, and give you an honorarium or financial representation for your time and your time and your perspective. So once the grant funding does come through, I'm sure you're aware there are things going on in our government that are holding things up. And once we find out if and when we will get our second year of funding that was supposed to come in 2 months ago, I'll get that out to you guys. So thank you both so much, and I really appreciate it. And have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And anything else you want to add before we go?
The coronavirus pandemic has been a very interesting situation for a lot of Navajos. And I want to thank you for helping me with the NAPI grant and getting it when I worked there at the San Juan Conservation District. I was able to utilize that NAPI grant during the pandemic to revive the farming, that community garden over there by Navajo Prep. And so that was actually, I would say it was a success for us because we were able to not just only for us, but to invite people from the community to learn about how to grow in a raised bed and learn about how to set up, not just in using raised beds, but also utilizing a small portion of that plot and growing corn from the ground, and just teaching them different methods about soil remediation and the water too, just where it comes from and what it does to what we're growing. And so what we were able to grow there was corn and squash and beans and tomatoes. And the community here is so strong. We were able to get donations from different farms, specifically from the San Juan Seed Savers and Permacultural. Beverly Todd was able to connect us with different farmers. And so we were able to get a variety of tomatoes from all the way to farms in Bloomfield and farms in Aztec. And so and we were able to not only share these different varieties of tomato plants, we were able to, help mobilize, and transfer all these plants to different places on the Navajo Nation. And I also want to thank you for allowing me to do the squash bucket project. I was able to get about 24 buckets to different elderly on and off the Navajo reservation. And it was successful. And so I was able to pass along eggplants, zucchinis, I want to say pan patties, and just different types of tomatoes. And so one of the main important things, especially not only during the pandemic, but because we're in a severe drought, was showing how to, you don't need to just grow you don't need to just grow food. You also need to think about the animals. And so we did a lot of grow beds where it was just for to attract pollinators. So we grew a lot of flowers, and then just sort of and herbs, just so that we could not only attract pollinators, but then also create an environment where hopefully we can keep the bad pests at bay. And yeah. So I want to thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. We really
Yeah.
appreciate this time and to share our knowledge, like, because we want to reach a broad audience and share knowledge. We believe that's key to success in agriculture, because agriculture is one of those fields that transcends all barriers, language, race, government. Everybody has to eat, and everybody loves sharing. Once you meet someone who grows, they want to share that knowledge. So that's one of the beauties of it. And thanks again.